If you had told me 3 years ago that I'd be in the situation I'm in now, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I was 25 years old, my husband was 29, and we had a 2-year-old son. When we first crossed paths, my dating experience was limited, and I had only been intimate with 2 other men prior to meeting my husband. My husband, on the other hand, had a completely different dating history. He had a reputation for being a player, someone who dated multiple people simultaneously. I even had suspicions that he might have a sex obsession because he was hesitant to commit to a serious relationship with me. During the early stages of our dating, I found myself ghosting him several times to nudge him into making a commitment. At that time, he was seeing other people and told me that I couldn't fulfill all his sexual desires if we were to be exclusive. Faced with this ultimatum, I decided to stand my ground. I gave him the choice of either giving our relationship a chance or moving on. Surprisingly, he chose to give us a shot and agreed to be exclusive with me. Once we committed to exclusivity, our intimate life became quite active. We were having closeness every day, sometimes even twice a day. To my surprise, I discovered that I could match his stamina and fulfill his needs. It turned out that I enjoyed lovemaking almost as much as he did. One of the reasons I hadn't been with many partners before meeting my husband was due to my religious upbringing. My strong beliefs had always led me to be more reserved in my romantic relationships. Once I moved in with my husband, I felt an immense sense of joy because I thought I had reined him in. Even his own mother remarked that she never believed anyone could keep him in check, given his reputation for being involved with numerous romantic partners. I took on the role of a detective to ensure my husband's fidelity. I placed tracking devices in his car and snooped around his social media accounts, but I discovered no evidence of infidelity. He appeared loyal and fully committed. When we found out I was pregnant, we decided to tie the knot, and I later gave birth to our son. However, something shifted in my husband after our son's arrival, more noticeably than before. He cut his long hair, became more career-focused, and stopped going out or spending time with friends. I genuinely admired the positive changes he was making in his life. The only challenge was that I wasn't familiar with this side of him, as it differed from the person I had initially married. Our sexual activity also saw a significant decline in frequency, going from being intimate every day to just once a week. Although I initially suspected my husband might be unfaithful, my investigation revealed that everything seemed to be in order. He was working longer hours and earning more money, which explained why he was spending less time at home. Interestingly, during this period, my sexual desire was at its peak, and I started turning to online content to fulfill my needs. Prior to this phase, I had never engaged in such behavior, but I found myself increasingly drawn to watching and fantasizing about the things I saw on the internet. What made it more challenging was that the more I watched, the stronger my desires became, and they felt insatiable. It got to the point where I started thinking about these explicit things I had seen online during intimate moments with my husband. One specific fantasy that began to occupy my thoughts was the idea of being intimate with multiple men simultaneously. I recognized it might sound unconventional, but I couldn't stop these thoughts from dominating my mind. Despite my husband being wonderful, I started to feel that our love life was losing its spark. I found myself getting annoyed by things about him that hadn't bothered me before. I came to realize that my sexual frustration was having a negative impact on our relationship, and I was fully aware of it. Since my husband and I were skilled at having open conversations about our emotions, I chose to communicate my frustration to him. He made an effort to initiate more intimacy and engage in additional foreplay, which was a positive step. However, during our intimate moments, it felt like his heart wasn't entirely in it, like he was doing it because he felt obligated rather than having genuine desire. We had another discussion about this issue, and he sincerely tried to make improvements, but despite his efforts, it still felt like something was lacking, and what he was doing couldn't fully satisfy my needs. As a result, I began to accept that my life might continue on this unfulfilling path. I kept turning to online content to satisfy my sexual desires. Then one day, my husband came home with exciting news. He had received a promotion at work that came with more responsibilities. While most wives would be delighted to hear that their husband was earning more money, I knew what this could potentially mean for our intimate life. Our relationship in that department was already strained, and I worried that it might become non-existent if he took on this new role. Even though I could see his happiness about the promotion, I didn't want to dampen his spirits. So, outwardly, I pretended to be happy for him, but internally, I was seething with frustration. To express my concerns, I began doing little things that annoyed him until he picked up on the fact that something was bothering me, prompting a serious conversation between us. During our discussion, I confessed that I had been contemplating the idea of opening up our relationship, a notion influenced by the online content I had been consuming. I proposed the idea of an open relationship, but he adamantly declined. I raised the topic a few more times, but he consistently rejected the idea. Then, unexpectedly, he came home one day and surprised me by expressing willingness to consider an open relationship. This caught me off guard since he had been resistant for weeks. I felt curious about what prompted this sudden change in his stance, but refrained from asking too many questions, fearing he might change his mind. By this point, I had done ample reading on successful open relationships and had adopted some guidelines to preserve the love and connection we shared while engaging with others physically. We established some straightforward rules to ensure the strength of our relationship. We both agreed not to become involved with our friends or coworkers. We committed to practicing safe lovemaking at all times. We decided not to bring any of our other partners home. Our son was to be kept separate from our open relationship activities. We pledged to keep each other informed about our plans and intentions regarding other partners. We also agreed to avoid any romantic involvement with other partners, which we clearly defined as behaviors like moving in together, meeting each other's families, planning to have children together, and similar commitments. These rules were established to maintain the strength and love in our relationship as we explored the possibility of physical involvement with other people. We established a set of guidelines to ensure the smooth operation of our open relationship. Firstly, we both agreed that it was acceptable to develop feelings for others, as long as we handled them maturely. We also opted to share our phone passwords and grant access to our social media accounts as a gesture of trust and transparency. Lastly, we committed to sharing details about our interactions with other individuals. These rules appeared equitable, and my husband gave his consent. We also decided that if the need ever arose to add more items to this list, we would discuss and amend it jointly. With these rules in place, I decided to give it a shot. I joined the dating app Tinder and began swiping right on the most attractive men I could find. I wanted to explore the fantasies that had been lingering in my mind for some time. Initially, I felt nervous when I matched with the first 3 men, but that anxiety gradually subsided. I engaged with 7 different men before eventually finding 3 who became regulars in this new phase of our relationship. I distinctly recall the moment I shared my initial experience with someone else with my husband, observing as he attempted to appear accepting of it. I must confess that while the idea of pursuing an open relationship initially held appeal, I had second thoughts when I witnessed the pain in his eyes upon hearing about it. Nonetheless, he reassured me that it was all right, and that he simply needed some time to acclimate to the idea. Over time, I refrained from sharing details about the other partners I was involved with because I could see how profoundly it was affecting him. Additionally, when I had been with 7 partners, he had only been with 2 women. To protect his feelings, I deliberately downplayed the number of guys I was seeing. However, he eventually checked my phone and discovered my deceit. This marked the beginning of significant issues in our relationship. He never looked at me the same way afterward, and our relationship grew strained. I unilaterally decided to end the open relationship because it was turning toxic. 3 of the men I had been seeing were pressuring me to commit to them, despite my having informed them about my husband and son, whom I deeply cared for. My husband declined to close our open relationship, citing a desire to even the score with me. He argued that I had been with 15 partners, and he wouldn't agree to closure until he had been with 15 or more women. I attempted to clarify that the 15 men were those I had conversed with, not necessarily those I had been intimate with, but he remained unconvinced. Our relationship took a sharp nosedive from that moment. He started arriving home late, and we completely ceased being intimate. I assumed he was out pursuing other women, but I later found out that he had lost his job due to his involvement with multiple women at his workplace, and the situation had backfired on him. When I learned about his job loss, it didn't come from him, but from someone else. Instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he placed the blame on me. arguing that I had introduced the concept of an open relationship. I reminded him that one of our rules had been to avoid involvement with coworkers, but he insisted that since he was working constantly, his coworkers were the only women he had access to. From that point onward, our relationship spiraled further downhill. Despite our decision to close the open relationship, my husband refused any physical contact with me. During our arguments, he accused me of being tainted and claimed he couldn't engage in intimacy with me without thoughts of other men. We were constantly at odds, and it felt like we were stuck in a never-ending cycle of turmoil. Our home became an extremely toxic environment, and amid all this chaos, I sought solace in the arms of one of the men I had been involved with outside of our marriage. He seemed to fulfill the needs and desires that my husband couldn't meet. When I confessed this to my husband, he chose to initiate divorce proceedings, and it was uncontested because our only significant asset was our home. In the end, I was awarded primary custody of our son, and my husband started providing child support. Our relationship had reached an irreversible point, and we parted ways. It didn't take me long to realize that the partner I had an affair with, the one I thought was my ideal match, turned out to be quite different from my initial impression. While I was with my ex-husband, he appeared to be the perfect person, but upon moving in with him, he underwent a significant transformation. To make matters more complicated, after we initiated divorce proceedings, my ex-husband secured a better job and began dating a woman who bore a striking resemblance to me. It's challenging not to feel regret every time I drop off my son and witness them together, living the life I once envisioned but allowed to slip away. I left the man I was with, quickly entered another relationship without giving myself the necessary time to heal from the emotional toll of the divorce, and my self-confidence and self-esteem suffered. After 2 years of serial dating, I made the decision to step back and reevaluate how I found myself in this situation. One thing I am absolutely certain of is that I wish I could turn back time and return to how things used to be. I don't comprehend how people make open relationships work, but for me, it had a devastating impact on my life and transformed me into someone I don't like. My name is Jennifer, a 40-year-old female, and my husband Michael, a 43-year-old male, is leaving me because I committed an unforgivable act. It all happened at an office party with my colleagues, where we were celebrating our surpassing this year's target. We were in high spirits, reveling in our success. I had informed my husband that I might be coming home late and that my work best friend Stacy, who is 35 years old, would drive me home if I ended up too intoxicated to drive. Somewhere along the way, I found myself flirting shamelessly with every attractive company affiliate and coworker. It was as if I couldn't help myself. I couldn't recall the last time someone had touched me that way, or shown such genuine interest in me. My husband's affection had become distant, and he no longer touched me or engaged in any intimate talk. About 2 hours before we were due to leave, I ended up in the bathroom with one of the affiliates. Let's call him Frank, who is 33 years old. Frank and I engaged in reckless sexual activity in one of the bathroom stalls, and it was incredibly exhilarating. I couldn't resist, especially since my husband's touch had become a distant memory. We continued for about 30 minutes until we heard someone entering the stall next to us. We quickly composed ourselves and vowed to meet again to finish what we had started. When I went home, I couldn't stop thinking about Frank all night. I even indulged in fantasies of him while lying next to my sleeping husband. It was both thrilling and guilty, knowing that I had Frank's phone number. We exchanged texts constantly over the next 3 days and made plans to meet the following weekend after the party. This time, it would be at the hotel suite he had rented for a 2-week stay in town. My excitement outweighed any nervousness because I was finally going to experience physical intimacy again in the same week. At that moment, I wasn't considering how Michael would feel if he ever found out. It was foolish to think he wouldn't. I spent the initial hours with him, sharing dinner, discussing work, flirting, occasionally touching, and playing. The sexual tension was steadily building, and I couldn't resist it, leading to an unexpected turn of events where we found ourselves unclothed. It was a different experience, and we indulged in it multiple times, thoroughly enjoying ourselves. The next day, I woke up feeling panicked because I hadn't informed my husband that I would be spending the night away. To my surprise, I discovered 3 texts and 10 missed calls from him, which immediately heightened my anxiety. I hurriedly got dressed and returned home at 7 a.m., relieved to find my husband still sound asleep. It was fortunate timing. I took a quick shower and changed into my pajamas, attempting to slip into bed next to him without waking him up. I managed to grab only 4 hours of sleep before he woke up, his anger evident as he questioned my whereabouts during the night. I explained that I had gone to Stacy's after a late final quarter meeting and had worked on a couple of Excel sheets while we both drank until we passed out. I told him that as soon as I woke up, I rushed back home to avoid causing him any further worry. Although he was irritated that I hadn't informed him about working late or going to Stacy's, I managed to convince him that I had been overwhelmed with work and hadn't found the time to call him. Surprisingly, he bought my explanation for the time being. However, a nagging feeling inside me told me that he wasn't entirely convinced because shortly after, I got caught red-handed. 2 days ago, I messaged Frank to arrange one last meeting before his flight. He agreed but insisted on a public place, which was reasonable. To cover my tracks, I informed Michael that I was having dinner with Stacy and one of the company affiliates to finalize some work papers and get a contract signed. I even shared the name of the restaurant we planned to visit. Uncertain of his reaction, I left work early to reach the upscale restaurant where we had arranged to meet. We were enjoying ourselves, making out and flirting, when suddenly, after about an hour, Stacy stormed in. She grabbed my arm and urgently explained that Michael had called her to ask if I was with her at that restaurant and that he was on his way. Panicked, we rushed outside, only to be confronted by Michael. He questioned our destination, and we told him we were heading home. Michael took my hand and inquired about my whereabouts the previous Saturday. He revealed that Stacy had attempted to act as though she knew I was staying at her place, but she seemed clueless about my location, both that night and the previous Friday. In that tense moment, Stacy decided to come clean about the night of the office party, admitting that she had seen me leave the bathroom with Frank, looking more than just friendly. She clarified that she didn't know any further details. Michael promptly led us to the car, instructing Stacy to go home. Once in the car, he pressed me for answers, wanting to know how many times such incidents had occurred, both before and after that night, and if anything had happened in the restaurant's bathroom on that very day. He bombarded me with a barrage of questions. I vehemently swore to him that the first time it happened was at the office party, and I was completely wasted. However, he remained unconvinced, labeling me a liar. Eventually, I had to confess that it had occurred more than once and that I had slept with him last Saturday. In his frustration, he pounded the steering wheel and berated me for my foolishness, claiming that I had destroyed the one good thing in his life. Following that outburst, we drove home in absolute silence. Upon our arrival, he locked himself in our son's old bedroom, where I could hear him talking to his friend Albert all night. Later, he came to our bedroom after I had gotten into bed and informed me that he wanted a divorce. He declared that he would keep our house because I didn't deserve to live in the home we had built together over the past 19 years as a family. He also emphasized that I shouldn't inform our son since he was going through college exams and would tell him when the timing was better. I felt utterly lost, with no idea of what to do next. Michael had stopped speaking to me, and our last conversation had ended with him instructing me to either secure a mortgage through work for an apartment or rent one from my savings. He gave me a 1-week deadline to move out. I was in a state of confusion and desperation, so I reached out to Frank and confided in him about everything. I needed someone to offer a solution. Frank suggested renting a hotel room nearby for a week until I found a more permanent place. I agreed, but told him to wait for me to call him once I had finished packing. Even in the midst of losing everything, I turned to someone else, the same person who was responsible for jeopardizing everything I had, the life I had built with Michael. I'm currently staying in the hotel room that Frank arranged for me. Michael hasn't uttered a single word to me. I'm actively searching for affordable rental options until I can secure a mortgage for a house. I've attempted to reach out to Michael numerous times, but it appears he has either turned off both his landline and mobile phone or blocked my number on both. I'm feeling overwhelmed and can't seem to think clearly. I'm torn between starting a new life with Frank or attempting to reconcile with Michael. I reached out to Stacy and inquired why she revealed our secret that night. She explained that she felt guilty about unknowingly being a part of such an affair and admitted that she was a terrible liar who couldn't have kept up with it, even if she had known beforehand. I attempted to visit our home, but it seemed deserted, and strangely the blinds were drawn far earlier than usual. I'm at a loss for what to do. If you want to understand the full backstory, please read my previous posts. My current mental state makes it challenging to recount all the details. I'm still in contact with Frank, who has been a source of support during this difficult time. Currently, I'm renting a van in what could be described as a relatively upscale trailer park, a place I wouldn't have discovered if Frank hadn't arranged that hotel room. It's different from what I had anticipated. Not as bad, yet not as comfortable either. Adjusting to this new life has been a struggle. It's been a month since I moved out, and Michael hasn't attempted to contact me. However, my lawyer informed me that Michael has initiated divorce proceedings, and the paperwork has just arrived at her office. It seems this might be the end for Michael and me. Our years of hard work and dedication have come to an unfortunate conclusion. I've lost my family, and I'm uncertain how our son will react. I anticipate he'll reach out to me once his dad informs him. I'm anxious about what Michael will say. Will he accuse me of cheating? I'm terrified that my son might come to despise me. I hope Michael will do the right thing and keep our son out of this. The only thing that gives me hope right now is the thought of seeing my son again. I couldn't bear it if he looked at me with disdain. I just wouldn't be able to handle it.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
It's challenging to believe that someone else might have a story similar to mine. But if they do, they might hesitate to share it. Nonetheless, I'll share my story. I'm 37 years old, and she's 31. I work in finance while she has a career in healthcare. We were together for 6 months, which might seem brief, but I never had any doubts about my feelings for her. I trusted her when she expressed her love for me and her desire to be with me. She genuinely appeared happy when we were together, and that happiness rubbed off on me as well. We've never been married, don't have kids, and don't live together. Last winter, she ended a 4-year relationship, and around the same time, I came out of a 1-year relationship. We met through a mutual friend, and we immediately hit it off. What impressed me from the start was that both of us wanted to be cautious and ensure that we weren't just rebounding from our previous relationships. After her breakup, she took some time to enjoy her freedom, and I used that period to regain my sense of self before my last relationship. This helped me rebuild my self-confidence and establish clear boundaries for myself. She said and did things that convinced me she was serious and ready for a new, meaningful relationship. She has a wealth of experience when it comes to intimacy and relationships. I was genuinely impressed by her maturity in these aspects. She clearly expressed her belief in open communication and the importance of respecting each other's boundaries. She also mentioned her preference for being in a monogamous relationship. Reflecting on it now, I realize there were warning signs that I overlooked. I'm aware that she sometimes drinks heavily and uses it as an excuse to behave recklessly. She tends to distance herself from those moments by attributing them to a different aspect of her personality. Even though I observed this behavior a few times and didn't notice any signs of infidelity during those instances, I convinced myself that I didn't need to worry about her faithfulness. This was especially the case because she always emphasized the significance of honesty and accountability. As I write this, I can't help but feel foolish. I chose to disregard the warning signs, hoping they wouldn't have any negative consequences. Unfortunately, hope alone isn't sufficient. Just 6 months into our relationship, I felt it was the right time to propose to her because I genuinely believed she was the one for me. It didn't seem like we were rushing into anything. The next natural step was for her to move in with me once her lease expired, which would be after she returns from her trip. Before we crossed paths, she had already organized a trip to Africa. She has a passion for international adventures and enjoys meeting new people during her travels, which she does at least once every 3 years. While I wasn't going on the trip with her, we were both excited about this fantastic opportunity for her, and we stayed in constant contact while she was away. We openly discussed our feelings for each other, leaving no room for doubt or confusion about our emotions. When she arrived in Africa, she encountered some difficulties with her pre-arranged taxi service, and it was a challenge for her to get in touch with her ride when she finally had access to Wi-Fi at the airport. She felt hesitant about using airport taxi services. In her moment of need, she reached out to me and I was able to contact the person who was supposed to pick her up from the airport. Her trip was scheduled to last for 2 weeks, during which she would explore East Africa. After settling into her hotel, she shared with me that she went to the bar downstairs and met a man who hailed from a different city, but was currently residing in that country. He was in town for a business trip and enjoyed having a good time while on such trips. He arrived at the hotel with a friend, and they were sharing a room during their stay. Interestingly, her newfound friend had also booked the same tour package as she did. Since he had taken that tour multiple times, he offered to be her local guide because she didn't have any acquaintances in the area. We maintained communication through WhatsApp as soon as she connected her phone to the local service called M-Pesa, which is used for payments and phone services in that region. We talked and exchanged messages whenever possible. It was during this time that she mentioned meeting the guy I mentioned earlier, and she believed he was trustworthy. On the night she met this stranger, we had a phone conversation where she reassured me of her love. I had concerns about her traveling alone, but she seemed to relish every moment of it. That was the extent of what I knew about the stranger she met at her hotel until everything unfolded. In her final week there, she decided to take an unplanned trip to a coastal beach resort. It was in line with her plan to have the flexibility to take spontaneous trips anywhere in the country, so it didn't raise any suspicions for me. However, the trip became quite chaotic due to flight cancellations and her luggage being temporarily lost, though she did eventually recover it. I provided her with support throughout all the travel difficulties she encountered. Upon picking her up from the airport, my excitement to have her back and hold her after 2 weeks of missing her was palpable. We shared an affectionate moment and headed home, but during our drive back from the airport, I could sense that something was troubling her. I was anticipating an intimate evening with her at her apartment, but she asked me to sit down and then revealed a confession. She admitted to cheating on me, engaging in unprotected intimacy with the stranger she had met at the hotel, all within 24 hours of assuring me she wanted to be exclusive. It felt like a sudden, agonizing blow to my heart. My world seemed to flip upside down, and I was left in a state of shock. When she saw the pain in my eyes, she initially tried to claim that the affair wasn't consensual and that she had been under the influence of alcohol. However, as I examined her phone and found multiple pictures not just with the one guy, but also with his friend, depicting them all smiling on the beach and during the safari, she eventually confessed. She admitted to not only having an affair with one guy, but also involving both of them at the same time. This revelation devastated me. She attempted to attribute her actions to alcohol, but I found it hard to believe, especially considering she had taken a 6-hour train journey with them to the beach resort. Her excuses unraveled further, as she also suggested that we had rushed our relationship and that she wished I'd been there with her. She even tried to convince me that the experience set to the backdrop of animal sounds was something extraordinary. She was reluctant to look back on this trip and experience regret, believing it wouldn't be fair to her. However, with each attempt to downplay what had occurred and avoid taking responsibility, I felt increasingly heartbroken. I can recall a text message from her on the day I suspect this happened where she explicitly stated, "I want to be clear that as of right now in my life, I don't want to have an experience with any other person in my bed than you." Perhaps the crucial phrase here was my bed. While it seemed straightforward, it clearly contradicted her actions. When I sought to comprehend why she was confessing, she asserted that she felt guilty and taken advantage of, as both men had a history of this behavior with several women. Given that we weren't married, didn't have children, and didn't cohabit, we reached the decision that ending our 6-month relationship was the best course of action. The breakup left me utterly devastated. What shook me the most was that it took us 3 months of dating and getting to know each other before we became intimate. She had only started using contraception a few months after we became intimate due to concerns about STDs and pregnancy. Both of us had undergone STD tests before discontinuing protection. However, she engaged in unprotected intimacy with these men within 24 hours of meeting them. This raised questions about whether it was consensual, particularly considering the level of caution and scrutiny we had exercised before becoming intimate without protection. It led me to doubt whether I truly knew her as well as I had thought. Our breakup was mutual and devoid of conflict, and she returned the engagement ring. Since we didn't cohabit, it lessened the heartache and allowed me to heal more rapidly. What was most painful was that I had already introduced her to my parents and family members. Consequently, I had to let them know about our breakup, but I chose to spare them the details due to the embarrassment it would bring. After her return from the trip, we lost touch for approximately 2 months following our separation. Then, unexpectedly, I received a call from a hospital staffer who informed me that I might have been exposed to HIV and that my name was on the list of contacts for my ex-fiancé. My heart sank and I felt genuinely frightened, even though we hadn't engaged in intercourse after her return from the trip. However, we had engaged in lengthy makeout sessions. I promptly reached out to my ex-fiancée because neither of us had blocked each other's contact. She broke down in tears and confessed that initially she believed she had contracted COVID 2 weeks after the trip. However, she later discovered that she had contracted HIV, but was too embarrassed to inform me. I expressed my concern to her, emphasizing that she had put my life at risk by not revealing this information sooner. In response, she argued that we hadn't been intimate after her return. I was genuinely worried about her because I held the belief that an HIV diagnosis was a death sentence. She attempted to ease my worries by explaining that HIV can be managed and that there have been cases where it was successfully cured. She also mentioned that many individuals with HIV lead normal lives. When you're confronted with the mortality of someone you know, even if your emotions toward them aren't particularly strong, you still feel empathy and desire the best possible care for them. Despite the fact that she had jeopardized my life, I found myself wishing her well. I was ready to offer my support, even though she assured me that she was already receiving excellent treatment. I consider myself fortunate because if she hadn't confessed to the affair, I might never have suspected anything, and we could have continued our relationship as it was. This could have led to a dire outcome. I believe that the universe was signaling to me that it wasn't my time. This has been a valuable learning experience for me, and I'm sharing this story in the hope that others might benefit from it. While each situation is unique, there may be lessons to be gleaned from my journey.